Hey everybody, this is Ryan Shrout here for this week's edition of the PC Perspective Mailbag. Thanks for joining us. Me, I guess. We're going to answer some questions. If you have questions for us, you can leave them in the comments of the YouTube video here or on the PCPer.com post associated with this video. So if you're watching this, chances are you can leave a comment where you're watching it, and we'll probably see it and maybe put it into a set of questions. If you have storage questions for next week, send them over to us because it looks like Alan's going to be filling in for me as I'll be out of town next Thursday. So look for that. Let's jump into it. I don't get it. Wants to know. I don't understand the fascination with Intel NUCs. Almost every site reviews them each time Intel releases an update, but similarly, small form factor PCs from OEMs like Dell and HP are ignored. Why do NUCs seem to get all of the attention over the often cheaper OEM devices? It's a good question. So, you know, I think a lot of the reason the Intel NUCs got attention at the beginning was because they were very unique. There wasn't a form factor really like that was high quality, had reliable, you know, was stable all the time, was reasonably built. That's obviously changed. I think the reason, the honest answer is that Intel wants reviews of them. Intel sends out those products to editors to review. They put hardware kits together, they send them out, and they brief people and they say, please review these products for us. And then editors and reviewers like us get them, take a look, figure out if we think it's interesting enough to write about, and go forward from there. The machines from other OEMs like Dell and HP that you're talking about they're not as active in sending them out, right? And I think we've done a couple here or there. We've done like Gigabyte Bricks devices as well. But most of the time, those are things that we're kind of actively asking for. And so if we don't get a lot of feedback from our readers or viewers that they want to see reviews of those types of things, then we kind of, you know, wait to see if any other company has something interesting they want to talk about first. It's really a matter of we kind of judge confidence in a product by whether or not they're coming out to us saying, we think you'll really like this product. We think you'll really like this design. We think this is a good value, etc. If they're not doing that, then maybe it's not a very good product. That's not always the case, right? It's very wide generalization. And we wouldn't have the bandwidth to cover everything that every OEM and system vendor and component vendor made anyway. So we kind of have to be choosy. So the real answer to your question is that Intel sends them out. They're still active in promoting them. And they're still pretty good sellers, especially on the business and enterprise side. So, next question comes in from Mike Fox, who asks, "Does a CPU or GPU's TDP and/or power consumption change during its lifetime?" Not really. No, the TDP isn't going to change. What you may see happen is coolers can become less effective, right? The fan could get gunked up, it could get dusty and dirty. I've had many machines in my day, not many, I guess, but some where the fans have stopped working and thus the heatsink is now taking on the full load, which will cause throttling and that type of stuff. I don't think the power consumption is really going to change either. The components that we're talking about, you know, they can degrade over time, but I don't think it's going to be enough that you're going to be able to measure that difference until it's to the point of breaking stuff, you know, blowing capacitors, for example. It's a good way to change your power consumption instantaneously, but not a good way to keep the hardware running for very long. So, Antonio Cunningham asks, "I'm in the market for a new router. What do you look for when shopping for one? My current router becomes unstable when more than 8 devices are connected or when handling multiple video streams at the same time." That sounds like your router just kind of has a slower processor in it, would be my guess. It's not able to kind of handle balancing that kind of traffic. That's a little surprising for me that only 8 devices would do that, but I don't know what the router you're talking about is or how old it is, for example. The router market's really interesting now because, you know, you have your basic routers and then you go into what I call the gaming class routers, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but they're the ones that are enormous now. You might see them have 8, 10, 12 antennas on it, all trying to, you know, promote themselves as being the, you know, fastest speed, largest range, all of that. And they generally are pretty good routers. They are also very expensive now, and I think this is the closest analogy I can think of to this is kind of the power supply race that we saw when power supplies, everybody was building power supplies. This was an area where component vendors realized that this is where people were upgrading their money. They had upgraded their components fast enough. Now they were waiting for their routers to support 802.11ac and all these types of technologies. So now they're pushing forward with all that. There was a WiGig push for a little while. Multi-user MIMO was the push. And so you'll see, it's not uncommon to see $300, $400, maybe even $500 routers out there. I actually just upgraded my wireless network at my house, but I went the kind of an opposite route with that, went with a mesh setup. I used an Eero 3 base station mesh setup, one downstairs connected to the modem on a underneath the entertainment center, one in the office upstairs, and one in the master bedroom all the way across the house and the upstairs as well. And the mesh networks are also not cheap, especially if you're buying into the 3-node modules. You've got Google that makes them, Linksys makes them, Eero makes them, Asus makes them, and there are other parties out there as well. And the idea of there is they're expanding the range of your network and the reliability of your network by, you know, having repeater base stations throughout it, but in a mesh system so that your device easily transitions between which base station it's talking to. And so far I've had really good luck with that. Haven't had any issues with it. What it does lack, what these mesh networks tend to lack, I don't think all of them do, is a lack of configurability. You know, these are meant to be very consumer centric facing things, not enthusiast centric devices. So, you know, the Eero app is how you set it up on your phone, right? You don't go to 192.168.0.1 anymore to set it up, because the average mom and dad doesn't want to or know how to do that. And setting it up was easy on the phone. And it worked surprisingly well. So it really kind of depends what you're looking for. If I were buying a single router at this point, I would be looking for 802.11ac. I would be looking for MU-MIMO, and I don't know what else other than that, honestly. You know, they're ones that look like upside down spiders tends to be the most common. What is those? Linksys, Netgear, they're all making enormous ones at this point. So curious what your thoughts are, what you end up going with on that. And I'm sure with any of these new routers, you're going to be able to support more than 8 devices. So that'll help. Tamasu82 asks, or maybe it's just Tom ASU 82. That sounds better. How does AMD's new StoreMI technology work? Is it a software or driver feature, or is it hardware based? What's the CPU overhead, and does it support Linux? No, I don't think it supports Linux. It is a Windows only capability now. This is a software feature. It's not a hardware feature. Technically, the AMD StoreMI is based on Fuse Drive, which is built by Enmotus, ENMOTUS, which has software that you can run on any platform, regardless if it's AMD or Intel or what generation, it doesn't matter. And it's a caching system. They call it a tiering system, which basically is different in that the storage is combined in capacity, right? So when you use Intel's, is it SRT or RST? SRT, thank you. You put a 60 gig SSD and you attach it to the system, and you want to do caching for a hard drive. The 60 gig cache kind of disappears. It doesn't even show up to the system. That's not the case with StoreMI. It actually combines it. So if you give it a 512 gig SSD or a 256 gig SSD and a 2 terabyte hard drive, it's going to show up as a 2.25 terabyte drive to the operating system. It's interesting in that you can install it and operate it with full functionality and performance even after you've installed the operating system. So if you install your OS to your hard drive, then you add in an SSD after the fact, NVMe, SATA, Optane, whatever you want it to be, then you can install the software, enable it, it reboots, it moves, shuffles some things around, and now you're running in this kind of accelerated technology. There are some changes from what we had tested previously to what's going to be shipping on it, so I'm not going to dive into anything else than that. We had, the setup process, maybe a little bit cumbersome. The performance was good. The deconstruction process, like if you wanted to revert, was not so great. So we're waiting to see what AMD comes back to us with changes coming up soon, and then we'll toss Alan at it and see what it looks like. So StoreMI technology looks like it could be really interesting. It's not perfect, but it looks like it's really interesting feature addition for AMD's platforms. Let's see. Kent Curry wants to know, now that updated motherboards for Ryzen have been announced, will Thunderbolt 3 be available for any Ryzen Threadripper motherboards, Ryzen or Threadripper motherboards? If not, are there add-on cards that support the platform? As far as I know, there are no add-in cards that support Thunderbolt on AMD platforms. The add-in cards that have existed, that I think still exist with some motherboards, require them to be installed on specific boards, I believe, and they have like DisplayPort pass-through, because obviously one of the important features of Thunderbolt is display connectivity. And when you're working with platforms that have integrated graphics versus those that don't, you kind of have to be able to, if you plug in a display into a Thunderbolt port and an add-in card where you have a GTX 1080, now what do you do, right? It's a more cumbersome thing than it tends to be. I don't think we're going to see any Ryzen motherboards with Thunderbolt 3. It's interesting. Ken reminded me that last year Intel actually open sourced the controller for that, I believe. So we expect there to be third parties that come out with Thunderbolt 3 capable chips, Asus, ASMedia, or somebody for that like that might do it. And in which case I think you'll see it on future platforms. It's possible that maybe, summertime Threadripper, the next Threadripper refresh, maybe that's when we'll start to see Thunderbolt 3 kind of make it to AMD-based boards. I would love to see it. I think Thunderbolt is still a really, really cool technology. I use it with my notebook all the time for docking and all that. So I'd like to see it. I'd like to see its expansion out in other areas. So we'll see soon. Let's see. Jan5 wants to know, can I cut and remove leads from my ATX power connector? I have a tiny case, and the ATX cable is difficult to work with. When the ATX standard was created, CPUs, excuse me, CPUs and motherboards didn't have the sophisticated VRMs on board that they have now, and thus relied on the power supply to provide 3.3 volt and 5 volts, etc. I'm wondering if this is still the case, or if maybe only the 12 volt and a few grounds will suffice. So a couple of things I'll point out. One, yes, ATX power cables can actually be a real big pain when working inside a small case. However, that being said, do not cut the cables on your power supply. The VRMs on motherboards are more sophisticated, larger, beefier, bulkier than boards from a long time ago. But that's mostly because motherboards have or processors and platforms have required more power now. Our TDPs are 105 watts on the new Ryzen parts, 120 watts or more on a bunch of other parts. So the VRMs there aren't doing voltage conversion. They're not dropping it from the 12 coming in to 5 and 3.3. The ATX power supply still has to supply that. So no, as funny as I think it might be for Sebastian to do this in a video that we post in a comical form on the channel, do not cut the cables on your ATX power connector. In general, don't cut any power cables, is what I will say for just about anything. Let's see. Josh C asks, I have a desktop for my primary computing needs, but I'm looking for a good secondary mobile device for browsing, email, and writing. What's the best option for about $300? Are Chromebooks a better choice than Android devices? Are the cheap Windows PCs with 4 gigs of RAM actually usable? How about the new base iPad model? These are all good options, actually. Chromebooks are better than Android devices. Most modern Chromebooks now will support Android apps if there's any specific ones of those that you need. But in general, Chromebooks are better built, better targeted towards those those tasks that you're looking at: browsing, email, writing, etc. Obviously, the detriment you have is you have to use Chrome. You have to use Google Docs. You have to use Gmail. Well, I guess you can use any email as long as it's browser based. So if you're good with those services, you're comfortable with your online connectivity, where you're going to be using the device most often, then yeah, I think Chromebooks are an amazing choice for that specific thing. And it's why the education groups depend on them so much and utilize them so much. The cheap Windows PCs with like 4 gigs of RAM, are they usable? Yes, they are. But they are going to feel slower to you now that you have a primary, if you have a primary desktop PC. You're going to be able to run Word, you're going to be able to run Chrome and Edge and whatever browser you want to run. You'll be able to do all the same stuff, but it's going to feel very different. Now, they're also probably using eMMC, for example. If you look at Chromebooks, they're probably going to be using some of the same hardware, but because of the way the operating system is kind of configured and planned out, it seems more like it feels like a snappier experience regardless. And as for that iPad, it's a fine option. It's great for browsing. It can do email, it can do writing. I don't believe the new iPad's $329, plus if you want a keyboard for it, you're going to have to pay another $100, maybe $60 for that. So it's going to be a little bit outside your price range. Also, the apps just aren't there. The version of Word for iPad is fine. It functions, but I tried to do this with an iPad Pro for a while to try to take it with me on some work trips and see if I can make it a primary compute device. And it just couldn't meet the needs. I couldn't, download a PDF and open it up in a reader, or, download a file and then I wanted to attach it to an email, or I wanted to attach multiple attachments to an email. And some of that stuff just doesn't work in the same way on iOS that it should, or that it does on Windows or even Chromebooks for that matter. So I think the iPad is good, but more for consumption, less for the creation side, which is what your email and writing would fall into. So hope that helps you out a little bit. Let's see. Let's just do one more. Nick Kearney asks, I pre-ordered a Ryzen 7 2700X. Congrats. This is my first time buying an AMD CPU product since the Athlon 64. I imagine there are a lot of people in your shoes. Are there any major differences or quirks between overclocking a Ryzen CPU compared to an Intel Skylake-based CPU? I wouldn't think there aren't any major differences in how the task is done, right? You still have a base clock, you still have a multiplier, you still have voltages to deal with. Memory is maybe a little bit more interesting on the Ryzen platform because overclocking your memory speed does have a direct effect on performance, right? In gaming, in benchmarks, in actual real world usage. The memory speed gives you more than just higher, aggregate memory bandwidth in the system, whereas on Intel platforms, it matters way less, right? You still get higher aggregate memory speeds, but in terms of application usage, it's way less. Because of the way the Ryzen processor ties memory speed to the Infinity Fabric, the Infinity Fabric is responsible for the communications of the intra-chip modules, CCXs, caches, all that type of stuff. It just means more because of that. Otherwise, everything functionally works the same, although be prepared for there to be different voltages to have to monitor, different temperature points with which to monitor. The timings of memory should be the same, although the importance and value of those and getting your most stable overclock is going to be different as you compare the two platforms. So, read some guides, read some forums, look to some locations where people have experience with that, and you'll be able to take, you should be pretty easily be able to take the knowledge you have from Intel-based platform overclocking and map it to the AMD-based processor overclocking. So do that. You can come to a pretty good idea of what your expected overclocking should be in the 2700X. Our quick testing, we're not expert overclockers here. We got 4.2 gigahertz on all cores. So, a couple hundred megahertz over, no, I guess that's probably 300 or 400 megahertz over what the all-core performance would be normally. So just keep in mind, that there's going to be a difference in headroom as well when you look at these platforms. So good luck, Nick. That's it for us. If you, or for me, if you have questions, leave them in the comments below on this YouTube video or on PCPer.com. And we thank you guys for hanging out. Oh, and I forgot to mention, if you don't watch our podcast, you missed the reveal of our Josh Tech t-shirts, mugs, and canvas prints. And I know you're going to need that canvas prints. So if you want to see the Josh Tech inspired t-shirts, go to joshtech.com. That's JOSHTEKK.com. It's changed quite a bit since you've been there last, probably. So thanks for watching. See you next time.